You reach into your bathroom cabinet, past the $40 whitening strips, past the fancy sprays you keep buying, and there it sits, that little brown bottle you paid barely $1 for. You've walked past it 1,000 times. I did too. I thought it was for scraped knees and nothing more. I was wrong, and it costs me hundreds of dollars a year to be that wrong. Here's the truth I stumbled into. Almost everything that little bottle does, the Romans were already doing 2,000 years ago with methods we threw away, and the modern version sitting in your cabinet is cheaper, safer, and more powerful than nearly everything the store sells you today. This isn't a hunch. I tested every single one of these in my own home, and I kept the receipts. By the end, I'll show you the one method I found buried in a Roman fuller's workshop in the ruins of Pompeii, a trick they used on cloth in the 1st century that will save you from ever buying stain remover again. Stay with me, because number 4 alone saved me over $300, and I almost skipped right past it. Let me back up and tell you how this started, because I want you to know I'm not some professor reading from a dusty book. I'm a plain man in my late 50s. For most of my life, I figured ancient history was trivia for people with too much time. Then one November evening, my bathroom sink drain clogged solid, and the plumber wanted $90 just to show up. I was standing there furious, holding that little brown bottle, and I remembered something I'd read the night before about how Roman bath attendants kept their basins and drains clear. On a whim, I poured it down the drain. 20 minutes later, the water ran clean. $90 saved by accident. That was the night I started digging, and I have not stopped since. Now, I want to be honest with you the way a neighbor should be. The Romans did not have a brown bottle labeled hydrogen peroxide. That exact chemical wasn't isolated until a French scientist named Louis Thenard did it in 1818. But here is what almost nobody tells you. Hydrogen peroxide is just water with one extra oxygen atom clinging on, and the moment it touches dirt, blood, or bacteria, that extra oxygen tears loose and oxidizes everything it hits. That violent little burst of oxygen is exactly the same force the Romans harnessed. They just got it from other sources: fermented compounds, sulfur fumes, sun bleaching, mineral washes. They understood the effect long before anyone could name the chemistry. And when I lined up what they did against what that bottle does, the overlap was staggering. So let me walk you through the 9 things, because each one replaced something I used to pay far too much money for. Let's start with your teeth, because this is the one that made my dentist go quiet. The Romans were obsessed with white teeth. A poet named Catullus, writing around 60 years before Christ, actually mocked a man for grinning too much and revealed the man's secret. He scrubbed his teeth and gums with a whitening agent every morning. And the historian Diodorus Siculus wrote about a certain people the Romans knew who rinsed their mouths to keep their teeth gleaming. What was in these old whitening rinses? An ammonia compound that lifted stains through oxidation, the very same principle behind the peroxide in every whitening strip sold today. The store version costs you $40, $50, sometimes $60 a box. Here's what I do instead. I take that 3% hydrogen peroxide, I cut it with equal parts water, I swish for about a minute, and I spit it out. Never swallow it. Do it a few times a week, not every day. Within 2 weeks, my teeth were visibly brighter, and I paid maybe a few cents per rinse. The Romans knew stains lift with oxygen. We forgot, and somebody made a fortune off our forgetting. But teeth were just the beginning. And this is where I started getting a little angry, because the next one is something you have quietly been overpaying for your entire adult life. Think about every cut, every scrape, every splinter that got infected. Now think about what the Romans did without a single pharmacy in sight. The Roman army was the deadliest fighting force of the ancient world, and their doctors kept soldiers alive through wounds that should have killed them. A military physician named Galen, who served the gladiators of Pergamon around 150 years after Christ, wrote detailed instructions on cleaning deep wounds. They flushed them, they used wine, and they used a sour fermented wash. And the reason it worked was oxidation and acidity, killing the invisible things that cause rot germs they couldn't see but clearly understood by their effects. Archaeologists digging at Roman military hospitals, like the one at Neuss in Germany, have found the surgical tools and the residue of these antiseptic washes. These men were flushing wounds with oxidizing agents 1700 years before we understood bacteria. That little brown bottle does the exact same job. A capful on a fresh scrape foams up white. That foam is the oxygen ripping the bacteria apart, the same violence the Romans borrowed from fermentation. I stopped buying expensive antiseptic creams the day I understood this. Therefore, if it cleans a wound, I started wondering what else in my house it could clean, and that question led me straight to the kitchen, where I found out I'd been poisoning my family with a false sense of safety. Here's the setup that unsettled me. Your kitchen cutting board looks clean, it looks fine, but raw chicken juice soaks into every scratch in that wood, and a quick wipe with soap does almost nothing to the bacteria living down in the grain. The Romans, believe it or not, were fanatics about their food surfaces. Cato the Elder, writing his farm manual around 160 years before Christ, gave strict instructions on keeping storage vessels and food surfaces scoured and treated, because they had learned the hard way that spoiled surfaces spoiled the food and sickened the household. They scoured with sulfur and mineral washes, oxidizing agents. Again, so here's my kitchen routine now, and it costs almost nothing. After I cut raw meat, I spray the board with straight 3% hydrogen peroxide, let it sit for 5 full minutes, and wipe it clean. It reaches down into the scratches and releases oxygen right where the bacteria hide. I do the same on my counters. I keep it in a dark spray bottle because peroxide breaks down in light. That's why it comes in that brown bottle in the first place. $1 of peroxide replaced a whole shelf of kitchen sprays that cost me $30 to $40 a year. That was the first real gut punch, but the fourth one is the one that made me sit down. Number 4 is the laundry, and this is the $300 one, so lean in. I used to buy the name brand stain removers, the color-safe bleach alternatives, the special boosters, all of it. Every trip to the store, another $8 or $10 into that plastic bottle. Add it up over a year for a family, and you're staring at $300 or more. Easy. Now here's the Roman part, and it's my favorite story in all of this. In ancient Rome, laundry was a real profession run by tradesmen called fullers, in Latin, the full ones. We have found their actual workshops, preserved in the ash at Pompeii, frozen exactly as they stood in 79 after Christ, when Vesuvius buried the city. Archaeologists excavated the Phalanca of Stephanus, a full laundry operation with its treading vats and drying terraces still intact. And the fullers had 2 great secrets for making cloth blindingly white. The first was aged urine, collected in pots on street corners, because as it ferments, it releases ammonia that oxidizes and lifts stains. The second, the finer treatment, was sulfur. They would hang the wet cloth over a wicker frame and burn sulfur beneath it, and the fumes bleached the fabric brilliant white through oxidation. Pliny the Elder describes this exact sulfur bleaching process in his Natural History, written around 77 after Christ. Now, I am not asking you to collect urine or burn sulfur in your laundry room. Here's the beautiful part: you don't have to, because that same oxidizing power sits in the brown bottle. For whites, I add about a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide to the wash, along with my regular detergent, and it brightens them like nothing I ever bought. For a specific stain, blood, wine, sweat, grass, I dab peroxide straight on it before washing, let it foam and sit for a few minutes, then wash as normal. Underarm yellowing on white shirts that I was ready to throw away came clean. The foolers of Pompeii would have paid a small fortune for a bottle this concentrated and this convenient. We can buy it for $1, and most of us have never once used it this way. $300 a year, gone. And that's when the real question started eating at me. How on earth did something this useful get so completely buried? Because that's the part that turned my curiosity into something closer to anger. Somebody benefited from us forgetting. When laundry moved from a local tradesman's oxidizing wash to a factory-made bottle with a brand name and a marketing budget, the simple truth got quietly shelved. It's not that anyone burned the books. It's that nobody had a reason to remind you, and a whole lot of people had a reason to keep selling you the expensive version. The knowledge didn't die, it just stopped being profitable to teach. And once I saw that pattern, I started seeing it everywhere I looked, and I realized this was bigger than a video. Let me tell you about something I put together for people who want to go deeper. If this way of thinking has been clicking for you, the idea that the most useful knowledge is often the oldest, and that someone quietly profited from burying it, then I wrote 3 books that go much further than any single video can. They're called Roman Roots, Roman Depth, and Roman Blueprint. Together they lay out the full system, the Roman methods, the chemistry behind them, and the practical routines I built from scratch for my own household. Everything I found in those excavation reports and ancient texts, organized so you can actually use it, not just find it interesting. You can find the details in the description below. But for now, let's get back to the list, because number 5 lives in your bathroom, on every surface you're afraid to touch with bare hands. The Roman bath, the thermae, was the beating heart of daily life. Millions of people passing through warm, wet rooms, the perfect breeding ground for mold, mildew, and every kind of grime. And yet the Romans kept these spaces astonishingly clean, because they understood that standing filth in warm water made people sick. They scoured the marble and the pools with mineral compounds and sulfur washes, the same oxidizing agents, applied over and over. Modern archaeology of bath complexes like the great one at Bath in England shows the drainage and cleaning systems they engineered just to fight the grime. Now look at your own bathroom. That black mildew in the grout, the pink film in the shower corners, the ring in the toilet. I used to buy a harsh chemical for each one, breathing in fumes that stung my eyes. Now I spray 3% hydrogen peroxide on the grout, let it sit for a good 30 minutes, and scrub. The oxygen breaks the mildew down at the root, not just the surface color. For the toilet, I pour in half a cup, let it sit, and brush. No fumes that choke you, no gloves that make you sweat, a $1 bottle where I used to keep 4 different cleaners. The Romans cleaned their baths with oxygen chemistry, and here I was buying poison in 4 different scented flavors. But therefore, if it kills mildew in the grout, I got curious about the air itself, and that led me to something I never expected about the way the Romans kept sickness out of a crowded house. Here's a thought that should stop you. Before antibiotics, before hospitals as we know them, a bad chest infection could empty out a whole household. The Romans lived packed into apartment blocks called insulae, sometimes 5 or 6 stories tall, crammed together in the city. Sickness should have wiped them out constantly. So how did they manage? Part of the answer was obsessive attention to clean air and clean surfaces in the sick room. Galen and other physicians prescribed fumigation, burning cleansing substances to purify the air of a room where someone was ill, and washing the surfaces with antiseptic solutions. They knew, without the science, that something invisible spread from the sick to the well, and that oxidizing fumes and washes cut it down. Today, I keep a small spray bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide, and when someone in the house has a cold, I wipe down the doorknobs, the light switches, the phone, the remote, all the things a dozen hands touch. Peroxide is one of the few things proven to break down the tough outer coats of many germs on hard surfaces. It's not magic, and I won't pretend it is, but it's the same instinct the Romans had: attack the invisible enemy on every surface it clings to. And the whole time, that ability was sitting in a bottle I'd been ignoring for $1. Now, I promised you something, and I want to keep that promise right here, because I know exactly what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this all sounds fine for people who love fussing around the house, but you want something dead simple you can do this very week with nothing special, no gadgets, no shopping trip. This next part is built specifically for you, and it might be the easiest win of the whole video. Go look at your feet. I'm serious. As we get older, toenail trouble and foot odor and cracked, rough skin become a quiet daily misery, and the store will happily sell you a $20 tube for each problem. The Romans, who walked everywhere on hard roads in open sandals, cared enormously about foot care. Their bath ritual always ended with attention to the feet, scrubbing and soaking and treating them. So here's what you do, and it costs pennies. Mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide into 2 or 3 parts warm water in a basin, and soak your feet for about 10 minutes, a couple of times a week. The oxygen goes to work on the fungus and the bacteria that cause the odor, and it softens the hard, dead skin so it sloughs right off. My feet, which I'd honestly given up on, came back to life within a few weeks. No prescription. No $20 tube, a basin, warm water, and a splash from the brown bottle. If you do nothing else from this entire video, do that one this week, and you'll feel the difference before the month is out. And once your feet feel that good, you're going to want the rest of you to catch up, which brings me to number 8, the one hiding in your kitchen sink and your garden. Let me set this up with a number that bothered me. The average household throws out an enormous amount of fresh produce that goes slimy or moldy days before it should, and every wilted bag of greens is money in the trash. The Romans were masters of preservation because they had to be no refrigeration and a whole empire to feed. Columella, a Roman writer on farming in the 1st century after Christ, filled entire books with methods for keeping food fresh and killing the rot that ruined a harvest. They washed and treated their stores to hold back spoilage. Here's my modern version, straight from that same logic. I fill my sink with cold water and add about a quarter cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide, and I soak my fresh vegetables and berries in it for a few minutes, then rinse and dry them well. It kills the surface mold, spores, and bacteria that produce rot fast, and my greens and berries now last noticeably longer in the fridge. Then I take that same idea outside. A weak solution, about a tablespoon of peroxide to a quart of water, poured on my houseplants and garden seedlings, adds oxygen right to the roots and fights the root rot that kills them. Gardeners pay good money for products that do exactly this. The Romans understood that oxygen and clean water preserve life, whether in the pantry or in the soil. 1 bottle, the kitchen and the garden both handled, and the grocery bill quietly dropped. But I saved the best for last, because this final one is the technique I found in that Pompeii fuller's workshop, and it's the one that ties everything together, the secret the whole video has been building toward. When I was reading through the excavation reports on the Phalanca of Stephanus, I kept coming back to one detail that most people skip right over. The Roman fullers didn't just soak dirty cloth and hope. They had a precise sequence. First, the treading in the vats to loosen the grime, then the oxidizing treatment, the ammonia and the sulfur to lift and destroy the stain at its source. And then, the step almost everyone forgets, they laid the cloth out in the sun on the drying terraces because the fullers had learned that sunlight combined with their oxidizing wash made the whites brighter than either could alone. They stacked two forces of oxidation on top of each other, sun and chemistry, working together. That was their master secret, and it's written into the very architecture of the building. The excavators found the drying terraces built right onto the workshop. Here is how you use that exact 2,000-year-old sequence this weekend, and I promise you have never seen a stain guide tell you this. Take your worst, most hopeless white item, the shirt with the yellow collar, the tablecloth with the old stain you were going to throw out, lay it flat outside on a sunny day, soak the stain directly with 3% hydrogen peroxide until it's good and wet. Then, and this is the fuller's secret, leave it in direct sunlight while the peroxide is still wet on the fabric. The sun accelerates the oxidation, driving that oxygen release far harder and faster than it would work indoors. Let it sit in the sun for an hour, keeping it damp, then wash as normal. I did this with a tablecloth I'd already written off as ruined, an old grease and wine stain from a Christmas years back. It came out clean, completely clean, the same sequence the fullers of Pompeii used on togas the week before Vesuvius buried them alive. Sun plus oxygen. That's the whole secret. And it was sitting in an excavation report that almost nobody outside a university ever reads. That's the moment it all came together for me. This knowledge was never lost. Not really. It was written down by Pliny and Cato and Galen and Columella. It was preserved in the ash of a dying city and dug back up by archaeologists with brushes and patience. It survived 2,000 years, one empire's collapse, and centuries of being ignored, and it ended up right there in your bathroom cabinet in a bottle you can buy for $1, waiting for somebody to remember what it was for. The Romans handed it forward, the excavators handed it forward, and now it's in your hands. Let me say the thing I really feel, plain as I can. I spent most of my life thinking I was too smart for old history, and the truth is I was just paying full price for wisdom that was already free. Every overpriced bottle in my cabinet was a little monument to something I'd forgotten how to do myself. Getting that knowledge back didn't just save me money, it made me feel less like a customer and more like a capable man again. And I think that's who you are too. If you've stayed with me this long, you're the kind of person who suspects that a lot of what we've been sold is just old, honest knowledge in expensive packaging, quietly buried so somebody could sell it back to us one bottle at a time. You're not paranoid. You're paying attention. That's a rarer thing than it used to be. So let me ask you one specific thing, and I really do want you to answer this one. Out of everything today, the peroxide teeth rinse that Catullus was mocking men over, the foot soak, the kitchen board, or that Fuller's sun and peroxide stain trick from the ruins of Pompeii, which one are you going to try first? Tell me in the comments right now, one word, if that's all you've got. I read them and I answer, and I want to know which of these you'd been overpaying to avoid. If any of this gave you back a little something that had been taken from you, then stay with me and subscribe, because that's exactly what we do here. We dig the practical genius of the ancient world back out of the ground and put it back in your hands where it belongs. Next time I'm going to show you what the Romans put in their drinking water to keep it fresh for months at sea, a method the great naval fleets relied on, and one more thing your grandmother might have known that we were quietly taught to forget. Don't miss it. That little brown bottle was only the beginning. So that's the overview. Inside the Roman Way Circle, I walk you through all 9 methods, the exact measures, the recipes, the tests I ran at home, receipts and all. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Thousands of old ways folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel any time, one click.